Welcome. It is the penultimate day of the National Consultation on Education 2021-2022. Education, Passport to the Future. I'm DK Roster. Even though a lifelong learning mindset is being encouraged, focus has to be placed on the transition of learners from one stage of development to the next. The ministry is cognizant of the socio-economic and other factors which may hinder successful transition from one level to another, and therefore aims to solidify and entrench the process that would yield the all-round development of learners from early childhood education through to post-secondary education and in the world of work, thus laying the groundwork for a quality workforce and a productive citizenry that is well adjusted to functioning in the 21st century. To help us interrogate the issue of this transition, we are joined in studio by Dr. Kamla Mungal. Dr. Mungal is the Director, Qualifications and Recognition at the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago. She is an experienced lecturer in leadership, organizational behavior and development, team development, curriculum, foundations, design, development, implementation and evaluation, and school administration. And joining us via Zoom are Dr. Krishna Sunarayan Singh, lecturer, teacher of English at School of Education, the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. He is a former secondary school teacher of English and has been a teacher-educator at the university for the past 22 years, where he has been involved in training primary and secondary school teachers. Dr. Sunarayan Singh's major research interest is in teaching of writing, especially in what effective writing instruction looks like at secondary schools. Now, just before we dive into this conversation, we are asking you to remember that your views and inputs matter. You can leave your comments or question on social platforms, call us live at 622-4010, WhatsApp us at 776-0440, and most importantly, please visit the ministry's website at moe.gov.tt to make your contribution to the consultation. Now on to transition of learners. And we want to thank you, Dr. Mungal and Dr. Sunarayan Singh, for being a part of this conversation. And I want to start getting from each of you, what are some of those milestones that you think are really important along those different developments? Because sometimes what we may think may not be what actually counts in the long run.
Well, thank you for having me, and good evening to you, good evening to your viewers. Good evening to my fellow panelists, Dr. Sunarayan Singh, and my colleague, of course. Well, as we talk about milestones, the way we have engineered our education system has created sort of natural milestones. You know, students leaving early childhood education, for example, that level, and going into the primary level, and then leaving the primary level, going into the secondary level. You know, and especially as they leave Form 3 and they start to think about career and choices, career choices, choice of subjects and so on. Those are areas that we have recognized as sort of natural milestones created within the system. We also understand milestones in terms of the psychology of learners and their stages and ages of development. Now, these are just benchmarks, guidelines, because we know we have learners demonstrating knowledge and competencies that are well beyond their age levels. You know, so as I said, we have to be attentive, and the transition of learners is helping us to be much more attentive to the student himself or herself, to give consideration to who they are, how they are evolving in this space that is now quite complex. You know, we describe the environment now as being VUCA, very volatile, very ambiguous, very complex, and so on. You know, hyper-connected. And that creates a lot of opportunities for the expression of differences. So while we can recognize milestones, we can recognize transitions, I think what is much more important is essentially crafting a process for students to enable their own transitions.
Thank you so much for that. And Dr. Sunarayan Singh, how would you add or complement that answer from the goodly doctor?
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Rostand, and good night to you, and good night to the viewing and listening audience. Thank you for having me here. So let me just add to what Dr. Mungal introduced there. I fully agree with her. And I think that one of the points that she made is in terms of the fact that we as a society, as a community, are the ones who created those milestones. Because, for example, we decided at what age our students will enter the education system, the formal education system, and approximately what age they will exit from it and get into university, right? That goes for the majority of learners. So we are the ones who have crafted the system, and the milestones that she identified are the ones that, you know, that all of us are aware of. So an example of a milestone that gets into the public eye very often is regard to literacy objectives or literacy proficiencies. For example, we say that by standard 3 or standard 4, children ought to be reading at a particular level. They ought to be comprehending text at a particular level. And if it is by that time they are unable to comprehend and read at a level that we have agreed upon, and that's required for them to understand and gain meaning from the text at that level, then that essentially is like a warning sign. So if at the end of primary school, for example, when a child is around 11 or 12 years old, if it is that when we administer the national the high stakes test, if it is that children fall short in the areas that are tested, then it's a milestone, yes, but again, that's a big alarm bell that tells us that something's not happening, something's wrong. So we do have those kinds of milestones in terms of academic milestones. The other thing we have to be cognizant of, aware of, is that there are also milestones that have to do with moral development, social development. So, for example, we would expect that when children spend some time in school, that they grow, they have social behaviors, they have behaviors that allow them to interact in a civilized way, if you will, with their fellows, because we know that young children tend to be very ego-centered. So we expect that as children grow as learners, go through the system, the education system, they become more empathetic, become more aware of the needs of others, the presence of others. They become aware that they have to regulate their own behaviors in the presence of others, and they also have to regulate themselves, their interests, what they want to do, if they are to achieve success, not only academically, but in other ways too. So that's just how I want to add to Dr. Mongol's idea, her conception.
Thank you so much. We take a short break, but I want to ask the question when we return. If we are the ones to create those milestones, how do we engineer new ones if we find that the milestones are not necessarily best fit for purpose at this point in time? Just before we take that break as well, though, you can call us at 622-4010, WhatsApp us at 776-0440, and remember, you can also send your questions and comments to the ministry at moe.gov.tt. Stay with us. We return with more.
$916 of the nation's primary and secondary school students will start the school year with brand new laptop computers. 15 primary and 15 secondary schools received devices from the Education Ministry, which is doing its part in government's drive towards digital transformation of the public sector. Education Minister Dr. the Honorable Nyangatsby Dolly explains.
There were still children that needed their personal device. And so the last count that we did in February of 2021 indicated 35,000 students indicating they did not have their own device. And so the means test was done subsequently. We have had 20,000 responses to the means test. And so it was necessary for the government to procure and provide more devices even after the Adopt a School program.
The Education Ministry has ensured not just the purchase of the devices, but that training is available for educators so they can provide a seamless transition from the classroom to cyberspace. Here are a few thoughts from those educators upon receipt of the devices for their charges.
I am Denise Edwards Ford, principal of the Chabonas Roman Catholic Primary School. I'm here this morning to collect 52 devices for my students. I am happy to be here to collect these devices because I know it will go a long way in leveling the playing field for those students who are needy.
My name is Ralph Peter. I am the principal of Karani Hindu School. This morning I'm very pleased to be collecting 80 laptops for the use of the children at the Karani Hindu School. So I must take the opportunity to thank the Ministry of Education for the provision of these devices.
My name is Amin Das Mahaber. I am the acting principal of Agostini Settlement KPA School, Chase Village. Today I received 37 laptops. These devices will become very useful to my students to access tutoring in their classroom.
I am Anne-Marie Prasad Singh, Principal Eldorado West Secondary School. I'm very thrilled this morning for this extraordinary experience of receiving these laptops on behalf of my students, and thanks so much to the Ministry of Education, and I look forward to working with my students to ensure that their education is well intact.
My name is Anne Sambrano, and I'm the principal of the Valencia RSC Government Primary School. It's a pleasure to be here this morning to collect 118 laptops for my babies. Thank you very much. From the principal and staff of the Valencia RSC Government Primary. God bless you all.
This was a production of the Office of the Prime Minister, Communications.
Welcome back to the National Consultation on the Education Policy. We are speaking with Dr. Mangal and Dr. Sunarayan Singh. And in the opening salvo, we looked at milestones in transitioning through the education process. And the idea now is if those milestones aren't necessarily working or as ideally as they should, how do we re-engineer those milestones in the system? And I want to throw that to you, please, Dr. Mangal. And I'll even add in the caveat of looking at learners or facilitating learners with specific disabilities in that mix while we re-engineer those milestones.
Right. You know, our education system and others around the world have been built on the basis of knowledge, what people should know. So for a long time we focused on what people should just know and be able to regurgitate and produce that knowledge. Suddenly the world is much more complex, different, requires a different kind of intelligence or different intelligences. And we've recognized that, hey, you know, just having knowledge is not sufficient anymore. So now we are transitioning and recognizing the importance of not just knowing, but being able to do, and then being. As Dr. Sunarayan Singh mentioned, you know, he talked about intrapersonal competencies, interpersonal competencies, competencies that we know are required not just for careers, and they're required broadly across many careers, but they're required for life, for us, guiding us in decision making, interacting with others, collaborating with others. We call these more transversal competencies. So these transversal competencies would form the basis for our redefinition of what people should know, be able to do, and be at different levels of the system. So we are now focused on an entirely different area. Rather than the limited area of knowledge, we're focused on much more competencies. The other thing is, and we've talked a lot about it, we've talked about child-centered learning and progressivism. However, very few systems, especially in the Caribbean region, have been able to make that transition, recognizing that this is actually a huge cultural shift that is needed. So this would also be one of the indicators, if you like, of getting to those new kinds of transitions. Suddenly the parent has become much more important in the teaching and learning process. Suddenly we have to take control of early childhood care and education that would have traditionally been in the realm of parenting only, and perhaps schools, religion, and so on. But the education system has now recognized how important it is to grab the students, to be part and parcel, to provide regulation in that system so that we can ensure students move progressively and successfully throughout the system, coming out with the ability to function in the society, not just to present a certificate that says, hey, I have chemistry, math, science, and so on. Okay, now what? Employers especially are asking that question. So they're banging on the doors of the education system to say, what can this person do? What can this person come into my company? I have a job here that requires underwater welding. Can they actually do that? Do they have the knowledge? Do they have the intrapersonal skills in order to do that? Can they work in a team? Those are the kinds of things that we are asking now to ensure. We're banging on the education system's doors to ensure that students can come and present those competencies, not just to have them, but to demonstrate that they have them. So new ways of demonstrating performance and capabilities and competencies would be a significant part of the re-engineering and the establishing of new benchmarks.
And I'm listening to you and I'm thinking of Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And looking at the difference between the banking system where you just kind of crack a head open and pour knowledge and close it back and expect people to regurgitate it on a piece of paper, and then you have a piece of paper saying, I know this, versus being able to critically look at knowledge. You may have knowledge and then you may have a gap, but looking and see how you can critically deal with that to bridge that gap. But let me bring Dr. Sina Reinsing in. Dr. Sina Reinsing, what are your thoughts on this?
So I thought you had an amusing analogy there, the cracking somebody's heads open and pouring the knowledge in. Yeah, and that unfortunately has been the model that I don't know if it's still in use, but it is subscribed to by a lot of persons outside of the education system, where they seem to believe that education is about filling up beings, with information. But I just want to extend what Dr. Mungal was saying there about the soft, what we call soft skills. That really has not been very much in our curriculum for the longest while. We have tended to promote cognitive skills. All right, a lot of what if you want to call it book knowledge and certifiable skills. So at the end of the day, as you were saying, you get how many ever CSEC and CAPE subjects, right? And employers now, the world over, are looking for these soft skills, these skills that say that you can work in a team, these skills that say that you can self-regulate, the ones that say that you can set your own goals, you can monitor your achievement of the goals and that sort of thing. Because what's the point of being a brilliant person, but then you can't communicate your ideas, you can't work with others, and therefore the team suffers and the company that you're working for suffers. So there's a lot of emphasis now on some of these skills that are difficult to measure. It's not impossible to measure them, but it's difficult to measure them, and it's kind of taxing. The thing is that the education system is in an ideal position to develop those skills, because we have these learners for many hours in the day for many years. The thing is that the curriculum has not promoted the development of those kinds of skills. And you asked specifically, I think, about the place of special education needs children in the mix. The thing is that we have to go back a bit and recognize that the whole nature of special education needs, inclusive education, education for persons with disabilities and that sort of thing, those are relatively new discourses in education, right? And they have only recently gained traction in the education system in the Caribbean. So whilst we subscribe to the ideas, because obviously nobody's going to say, hey, a child who has special needs, a learner who has special needs should not benefit from education. Nobody's going to tell you that. A major issue, however, has been how do we operationalize what should be best practices or good practices in treating with these children who require more attention, more resources, more specialized teaching than for children who do not have those kinds of special needs. So that is a problem that exists in the Caribbean education system as a whole, and which we have not so far been able to solve in any kind of systematic way. So it requires, I think this is part of what the national consultation about. It is that if we were to mainstream if the discussion would become mainstream, and we would therefore have a way of bringing special education needs learners into the mainstream discourse, then what is it that is required? So then we have to go back to a bigger question, which is special education needs children, as well as children who don't fall in that category, are all learners. They're all evolving and developing from the time they enter school or before they enter school and until they leave the education system and go into the world of work. So a major question that we have to address in this consultation as we move towards creating some kind of educational policy, a big question we have to address therefore is what kind of facilitating environment or environments will we need to create if we are to be an enabling sector of society? Because education is an enabling sector. That's what it is. So the question is, how do we go about facilitating the needs of all of these learners? Both those with special needs as well as those without. So that's my 2 cents worth so far.
Thank you so far. But you speak of the fact that there's this amount of time, this level of engagement between educators and students. But if the only thing you have in your toolkit is a hammer, you're going to try to treat everything kind of like it's a nail. So creating that enabling environment, facilitating that environment is one thing. But building the policy is, yes, it's well and good, but how do we enable the implementers of that policy, those main implementers?
Perhaps I can use an example from my days as a principal, primary school principal. So there were some kids that I wanted to take in, and I did take into the school that some of the teachers felt they were not prepared to teach. Like, how are we going to deal with this child? You know, and I took in the children nevertheless. And we had to make do, as you said, with whatever tools we had. You know, the own motivation of the teacher, my ability to motivate, inspire, support, whatever it is I could do in order to ensure that that teacher was providing that child with the experiences that he, and I'm thinking of one in particular, so I'm going to use he, that he needed in order to learn and demonstrate his learning. However, we do have the Student Support Services Division of the Ministry of Education. What would have helped significantly, and this is years back, this is in 2003 to 2007, right, that I was a principal. So things might have changed a bit now. However, what would have helped a lot is for us to together diagnose the child, create his individual education plan, meet with other stakeholders who would be experiencing similar conditions, whatever that disability was. There would be a whole community out there, a local community, a global community that we could touch base with in order to understand what it is we're dealing with and see where there are opportunities for this child to learn differently and for us to tap into those opportunities. That's the problem. We're not connected. We're not working together towards a predefined end that makes sense for the child rather than for the system. So everybody would be talking about how much he is not learning rather than what he is learning and can do from one level to the next. You know, and that is the important question. What can this child do? What is he learning? How am I able, if I'm a professional, I'm a teacher, I'm a professional, my job is to engineer teaching and learning mechanisms in order to facilitate your learning.
That true meaning of educare in terms of illuminating from within.
Exactly. And I'm the professional, so I'm the crafter of this strategy with all of the knowledge that I have. That's my job. But the system needs to be supportive, so you build in those support mechanisms, those from the ministry then liaising with what would be non-state actors, you know, who are involved in this process. A lot of people are involved. We are not that unique in that regard. Let's learn from each other and support each other. That's the collaboration that we don't have even amongst our own ministries here to facilitate that kind of progression with the child in mind rather than the curriculum in mind.
And that is a very interesting point for us to take the break on, because we have a question from Facebook that ties into that sort of ethos. But once again, I see the possibility or the community of professionals actually learning from each other, raising or including themselves into the conversation again. But we continue the conversation when we return. Stay with us. We come back with more.
The government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago has made a $50 million investment in the nation's future. The Ministry of Education, along with its public and private sector partners, distributed laptops to several primary and secondary schools in its drive to digitize education. The first module in this digitization plan was the Adopt a School program, part of government's public-private sector partnership, contextualized by Minister in the Ministry of Education, the Honorable Lisa Morris Julian.
11 months ago, Minister Dr. Dolly and I walked into the ministry and she made magic happen. Her first initiative of Adopt a School program was a roaring success. And now I'm very pleased to welcome our colleague, Minister Alison West, as we take part in the digitization of not just the ministry, but every single school in the country with government support. The future is now, and I'm pleased to be part of this program.
Senator the Honorable Alison West, Minister of Public Administration and Digital Transformation, explained their role.
There are all sorts of opportunities that this movement into the digital world allows us. The Ministry of Public Admin and its agencies, the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago and IGovTT, are committed to working with the ministry to ensure that the schools, the children and the teachers maximize this opportunity.
Education Minister Dr. the Honorable Nyan Gatsby Dolly.
This act by our corporate sponsors and what's happening today brings our students and our focus clearly before the country. Education has moved digital. We have had to do this from March 2020, and in that mode, it was emergency mode because we had to close schools to prevent the spread of the virus, and we knew that we had children facing examinations, and the only way we could connect with them was in the virtual world. And it's not just about the device, it's not just about the laptop. The Teacher Training Division, which has been instrumental in providing the training for our teachers so that they would use the tool well, for our students understanding how they use this tool. When we speak about the optimization of our school learning management system, when we speak about the procurement of ebooks, when we speak about dealing with the learning loss in math and grammar through the provision of a service online, when we speak about digitizing all of our school records, we speak about that not in the far distance, we speak about it now. All of us here stand together as a team working in the best interest of our children. And we are so happy to have come to this point and to say that we are here now, we have far to go, and we are about the business of transforming education, not by magic, but by hard and persistent work. And we understand what is needed, and we will do what we have to do.
This was a production of the Office of the Prime Minister, Communications.
Welcome back. We are speaking with Dr. Kamala Mangal as well as Dr. Krishna Sunarayan Singh. Some of the things we've already broached, some of the topics we've already broached: engineering the education system, community of professionals, facilitating environment and enabling environment, intra and interpersonal skills development. And on that intra and interpersonal skills development, we had a Facebook question, and I think I want to throw it to you, Dr. Sunarayan Singh. From your viewpoint, from your standpoint, does the Ministry of Education focus on these soft skills that we've been speaking about?
So I don't know that the Ministry of Education could be brought into whether the ministry facilitates it or not. It's has to do with the curriculum that is used in schools throughout Trinidad and Tobago. So the question is whether, and remember how the curriculum comes about. The curriculum is a document that guides teaching and learning in our schools. And the curriculum is usually created through consultation between the various stakeholders. And when it's necessary, the curriculum is adjusted to suit the prevailing conditions. So the thing is that if something, now we have a saying that what is not tested is not taught. So that's a popular saying in education. What is not tested is not taught. And therefore, one of the sad realities is that if we are not testing, we are measuring, if we're not assessing children's growth or learners' growth in these soft skills, from the time they enter to the time they exit school, then you will not have formal instruction in it. Let's take something like co-curricular skills, right? We know, if you recall, maybe before the pandemic, maybe like 2018 or so, there was this big furor, if you will, about the negative impact of sugar and lack of exercise, sedentary lifestyle on children, especially young children. And the ministry moved to ban sugary drinks, sale of sugary drinks in schools, right? Then there was this great movement towards the mainstreaming of physical activity, getting children fit, because we wanted to combat obesity. Now, the thing is that those things fall under physical education. You can easily put that under the physical education and look at the principles that guide physical education and the physical education curriculum. People might argue that you can put interpersonal skills and discourse skills under social studies, and maybe you can. However, the thing is that if you make these things examinable, right? If you make the development of skills examinable, you sit down and you write something or you're observed, then what is there to say that these things are not going to end up the way that examination results in some of our subjects will not end up, and people won't start missing classes because it is an examinable subject. So the thing is that the soft skills and the interpersonal skills are skills that have to be acquired across the curriculum and through your presence in class and in the school, and the fact that you take part in school activities and that sort of thing. It can be structured into schools and what schools do. So that I don't know that you can lay blame at any door anywhere and say, well, this entity is to blame and that entity is to blame. The thing is that we have to, because we are becoming increasingly aware now about the importance of these skills, we have to have a national conversation, which I believe we have started, about how are we going to value these skills, and how is that valuing going to be reflected in what we do in schools. I would seriously counsel or recommend against making these kinds of skills examinable and putting them down to assessment, because then you will end up with it being like an examination subject, right? So that's my take on it.
All right, thank you so much. And I want to reframe the narrative as opposed to saying, okay, well, it's a matter of laying blame at the feet of anyone, as opposed to saying, okay, well, how can we include these things that are proving themselves to be so important to development of individuals and therefore society? And you spoke about possibly being able to put some of these things into the curriculum under social studies. We have a WhatsApp caller saying, what about VAPA, the role of visual arts in assisting these core areas, soft skills, or being a core area itself? And I throw that to you, please, Dr. Mangal.
Thank you. Yes, actually, I do believe that these soft skills, as you call them, they actually come with very hard backing, by the way. So, you know, it takes a lot to learn them, and it takes a lot of background knowledge in psychology, sociology, skills in coaching, and so on to develop them. But yes, they belong in all areas of the curriculum. So not just VAPA. Right now they are located in health and family life education in the main and in the social studies. However, they belong in mathematics, science, sports, any other subject area or discipline that you can think about. And they belong there as cross-curricular competencies. But they must be clearly defined. And I do want to deviate a little bit from what Dr. Sivnarayan has said and suggest that perhaps the way to look at assessment of these skills is through the use of rubrics in which we observe their performance and guide them with respect to these rubrics. So, hey, you know, we could say, for example, in doing that science experiment, you did not include this particular colleague. Did you notice that? You know, your friend was excluded from the team. And we could bring that to their attention. And how can we include them? Can we reflect on that a little bit?
But that's also a matter of building the capacity of the educators as well.
Correct. And that is a real issue. I don't know that teachers are sufficiently equipped with coaching, guiding, mentoring skills that they would need in order to really facilitate that kind of discussion and that kind of discourse. But it is not a lost cause. Once we've identified it, we can find mechanisms for teachers to continue their professional development. We've had long discussions about licensing teachers and continuing professional development, CPD points and so on. Certainly now with micro-credentials and so on coming into the market, we can have those mechanisms. And in fact, if you look at education systems, they are using a lot of micro-credentials for teachers. There are some teachers who will take 2 days in order to demonstrate their proficiency with, for example, let's say formative assessments. There are others who might need 2 weeks or might need a month, you know, but it allows every teacher to learn about it, apply it in the workplace, demonstrate their competency and proficiency in that regard, and be recognized for it and validated for it.
And I think it also starts from the point of genuinely wanting to do better, from wherever that desire comes out, wanting to do better. And we have a parent wanting to do better by their child, and I'll keep that with you, please, Dr. Mongol. How can I, as a parent, help this isolated child given the COVID-19 environment?
Yeah, that has been a big, a pretty big issue for many students. The isolation, yeah, there's a lot of psychological trauma. But opening up our world, even though we are home, we still have opportunities in the online environment, of course, for children to interact with each other, for them to listen to stories. And I think, you know, a big step in terms of technology would be the metaverse, where they can interact in real time, you know, and learn skills, demonstrate skills in real time, in real context. I mean, real, quote unquote, simulated, of course, in the metaverse. But as a parent, I would say, bring life to the environment of your child. Life has not stopped. You know, it's just life is now looking a little bit different. I can play with others in different spaces. You know, I can share my thoughts with others using the technology. So the technologies are facilitating learning, but they could facilitate living as well. And then, again, you'd have to use your immediate environment, those who are closest to you, who can be near to you, to be part of that discovery and sharing and gaming. And, you know, it requires making that time for your child, playing together, you know. My own adopted grandchildren always playing with their parents, you know, and it takes that kind of commitment from the parent, from the family, let me say it like that, to bring that joy into the space.
And I'm glad you're talking about the need for that sort of commitment, because not everybody is able to hop on a digital plane ride to explore the metaverse. So what other sorts of recourse do we have? And I even ask, I want to bring Dr. Sivnarayan into this, to But before we ask you to speak to that, please, Dr. Sunarayan Singh, we have a caller from San Fernando. So we say good evening and thank you for joining us. Caller from San Fernando. Okay, well, I guess they'll join at another point. But in terms of how do we help in terms of the isolation, Dr. Sunarayan Singh?
That's an interesting question, and I would, if presented with that situation, I think we would need to find from the child what it is the child wants, because what is isolation? You know, we, in literature, for example, we always talk about the difference between being alone and being lonely, right? And if someone is isolated, so a hermit chooses to be isolated. In this case, you have a child who is isolated by force. And but has, I'm assuming, has access to technology, and therefore theoretically has access to friends who are also connected via technology. So assuming that is the situation, I would find out from the parent, what is it that the child wants? Does the child wish to connect with others? And at what level, what degree of engagement does the child want with others? Dr. Mongol is talking about the metaverse, and I have some big question marks over the metaverse, because my understanding of the metaverse and virtual reality and those kinds of technologies is that they can lead an individual more into self-absorption, right? Because you can then, like for example, if you put on the VR headset and you enter this virtual world, then you can end up becoming a major participant in that world, and you have no desire to connect with others, right? So to address the parent directly, I would say I would connect with the child and find, well, what is it that you want? Are you comfortable by yourself? Are you comfortable reading? There are some people who read, they can read, they have, you know, because of our access to the internet, we have literally thousands and hundreds of thousands of texts, books, videos, that sort of thing at our disposal, at our fingertips. Is it that the child is comfortable with that and is developing quite normally by reading these things, and is engaged in activities that are wholesome and healthy by reading? And is the child therefore maybe escaping from toxic interactions with individuals in a face-to-face context? Or is it that the child wants to engage with others face-to-face or via the technological means? So I don't know that the adult can make that decision. I think the adult has to communicate with the child and find out what is it that the child wants. Okay, and then on the basis of that, then once the conversation starts, the adult can progress and move on to dealing with it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think that raises the issue, or asks the question once more, of who the stakeholders are in terms of being able to transition through the education system. And I want to thank you, Dr. Sunarayan Singh, for raising that point and making the distinction between being alone and suffering from loneliness. Because I remember at one point in time I was very comfortable to be in a corner by myself and I have a book. I say that reading for academia kind of spoiled me for reading in general, because as opposed to reading something from cover to cover, just edification, enjoyment, you know, trying to prove a point or disprove a point, and you're trying to get to the heart of the matter, dive in, dive out, and just organize like that. But in terms of engagement, building those inter and intrapersonal skills, what are some of the factors for and against when you think of volunteerism or establishing a national volunteer system in Trinidad and Tobago? How can that help take us forward?
Well, certainly the space in which you enter to volunteer is a space that is shared. And so you'd be demonstrating those competencies. You'd have the opportunity to develop and demonstrate those interpersonal, intrapersonal communication skills, even critical thinking skills, and so on. You will be able to also develop empathy. You know, so we have, you know, that's not something, we talk about it a lot, but Culturally, I know at the last assessment that I'm aware of Trinidad and Tobago's environment, we really don't demonstrate a lot of empathy. We have a lot of factors, familial factors and so on, that tend to promote more self-centeredness, I would say. So that demonstration of empathy, wanting to help, needs to be kind of widespread in the society, which is why systems have done that. They've made it voluntary for you, they've made it mandatory rather, for you to now do some community work as part of the credits that you need to earn in order to complete this certification at this level at the end of secondary school.
And that's one of the things that make me smile sometimes when I hear mandatory volunteerism. Does that make you smile as well, Dr. Sina?
Oh yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, Mr. Ruston. That was a serious irony. That there's this thing about, so I'm doing something voluntarily because you mandate me to do it, right? You're forcing me to do something and telling me it's voluntary. There's an irony that we have to deal with inside it, right? And I found that truly amusing. To go back to the question you raised about volunteerism, I mean, obviously there are pluses that Dr. Mangal talked about, prime of which is the whole business about the development of empathy. And when you volunteer, typically people volunteer to do work and engage with projects that bring them into contact with individuals who are in need of that kind of voluntary work, right? So it might be that you engage in community service, what's it called? Service learning. We get children involved in service learning, that sort of thing. So essentially what's happening is that you're coming out of the covers of your book and dealing with your peers and with your teacher, and you are going into the real world, and you are developing your skills. It's empathy, yes, but not only empathy. It is the recognition that there are humans out there just like me, right? Which isn't necessarily only empathy. It is a recognition of the common humanity of people, and they have needs. One of the interesting things about volunteerism too, depending on the context in which volunteering occurs, is that if we say we are going to develop a volunteerism program, then I would say we need to expose the learners who are volunteering to persons who receive that voluntary effort, where the recipients of it don't necessarily look like or sound like or subscribe to the values of the volunteers.
And that is a point I want us to return to when we come back from the break, Dr. Sina Reinsing. Stay with us. We come back with more.
In May 2021, Education District Health Services Units, or EDHSU, were established, staffed with an education house officer supported by registered nurses in each of the 7 districts in Trinidad. The EDHSU has been a critical element in the return to face-to-face school, as they are the liaison between the school and the county medical officers of the Ministry of Health, managing any suspected or confirmed cases of COVID-19 on a school compound. As part of the unit's mandate, detailed guidelines and standard operating procedures have been developed to safely manage any suspected or confirmed COVID-19 cases. These include the installation of additional sinks, the provision of antibacterial soap, a stock of masks in the event of loss or damage, disposable gloves, and cleaning supplies. With the return to in-person classes, the Ministry of Education implemented several layers of measures to aid in the adherence to health protocols and the protection of students, teachers, non-teaching staff and visitors while on the school's compound. A comprehensive guideline for the reopening of school was developed in collaboration with education stakeholders. It provides procedures for administrators for the safe operation in school, including spacing of desks, in classes with seating manifests and signage in administrative areas. Thermal scanners were procured by the Ministry for installation in every public, ECCE center, serval, primary, secondary, and special needs school. Everyone entering a school's compound is subject to temperature checks, sanitizing, and recording of contact information. This measure is a critical element of the health protocols and is supported by the school's security and the health and safety staff. Detailed COVID-19 response protocols have been implemented at all schools. The school is sanitized and the contact tracing process begins. Students are excited to be back in school and have longed to catch up with their friends after 2 years of being apart. The objective of the Ministry of Education is the eventual safe return of all of our nation's children to school. Everyone has a role to play in ensuring the safety and security and success of these students. Teachers, administrators, students, parents, our cleaners, cafeteria staff, taxi and maxi drivers, we all have a role to play in the protecting of our children and getting them back to the education they deserve. Let's get it done.
This was a production of Government Communications.
Welcome back. We are discussing transition through the education system with Dr. Kamla Mangal and Dr. Krishna Sunarayan Singh. And during the break, I was sharing that some cultures, there is a level of volunteerism that is understood so well that it doesn't necessarily need to be verbally articulated as well. But Dr. Sunarayan Singh, you were starting to expand on the point that volunteerism should possibly go beyond the normal social circles, people that you expect to see, people that you interact with. Take me through that process a little more, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we have to interrogate what's the purpose of the volunteerism in terms of the growth and development of the learner. And if we can establish what are those purposes, what is it you want? What is it we want these learners to acquire? What kinds of understandings, what kind of skills you want them to acquire? I think it would make sense if we expose our learners to recipients of their voluntary effort, who, for example, look different from they do. They may hold different values. Maybe they sound different from them. Okay. In other words, what we want is an experience that causes the learner to extend or expand their understanding of the social world. Because when I go to school, you see, okay, the way that our education system works, right, is that we have a stratified education system. The kids from middle and higher social economic brackets go to particular kinds of schools. By and large, children of the lower socioeconomic system go to other kinds of schools. So we have split our learners at secondary level into at least 2 tiers on the basis of the results of the secondary entrance examination. And at least at secondary level, you are moving the circle of people that you're moving with tend to look like you and sound like you a whole lot. So for secondary learners, at least, if you introduce volunteerism, who is it that they're volunteering their efforts to help? Is it persons who are still within their circles? Is it persons who look like them and sound like them? Is it persons who they will deem quote unquote unfortunate? So then what is the purpose of going to help these so-called unfortunate people? Is it then that we want to develop particular kinds of outlooks, dispositions in these children? So I think we have to be really, really careful in managing the process. And as Dr. Mangal pointed out, you can't have volunteerism that's mandated. You pointed out that some societies do have that tradition of service learning, and It's ingrained in them, and those, as far as I recall, those tend to be more like homogeneous societies. Ours is not a homogeneous society. We are stratified every which way. We are multicultural, multi-everything. And I don't know that we should go around mandating that people should volunteer for anything. That would be one of the deepest ironies ever. It's just like the thing about national service. I mean, you can't mandate these things. I think you need to make them attractive. We need to promote them and make them attractive so that people will want to do it.
And you have me thinking of Edna Manley and Professor Rex Nettleford looking at an inward stretch to have that outward reach. But we have a Facebook question. What if a child refuses to interact? Is it possible to create learning activities that encourage interaction? And I see you nodding your head in the affirmative, Dr. Mungo, so I'll let you tackle that. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Certainly, you know, children mature at different ages and stages. We know that. We know that at early ages they're very egocentric and so on. And some children can remain egocentric, withdrawn. This could be related to their personality, could be related to their psychological structure, whatever it is. And we want to respect that. However, and if I could describe systems that really put the child at the center, you know, it is still important for the system, the education system, and when I speak of the system, I speak of all players, all stakeholders, to work with that child for him to engage with himself and then to engage with the world and provide those opportunities as he or she desires in order to engage with the world. And if we take, for example, on the same issue of transitioning learners, you know, ensuring that they are successful in life, in career, and so on, in their own educational pathways. Ontario, for example, has a program called Creating Pathways to Success. And it is so child-centered. The child decides, answers 4 questions basically. Who am I? What are the opportunities out there for me? And what goals would I like to set for myself? Well, who would I like to be and what goals would I like to set for myself? And that process of self-examination and then looking at myself, looking at the world in terms of the opportunities it is affording me is a process that every child should learn to engage. Nobody should be telling you what to do, what to become, what job to take on. You know, like in my days, I was told, go and teach. Luckily, it worked out okay. You know, but there are many people who are being told, go and do a medical degree or become a doctor or lawyer, and that has been a tradition for a long time. And they're miserable, you know, but unless you learn to engage in that process yourself, it doesn't happen. So yes, engineer, but engineer in concert with and in tandem with the child's own desires, needs. Your job is to create a facilitating environment, to expose, to excite, to interest, and so on. That does not stop for any child, regardless of whether they're completely egocentric at any point in time or where they are. That job remains for us to create the environment so that they could look within to bring out the best in him or her.
And that process of guided introspection, is there a place in that equation for psychometric analysis? Because as opposed to just saying, you go teach, you be a lawyer, you be a doctor, because I couldn't be, so you're going to be. Looking at saying, okay, well, there is this process of introspection, so I know who I am, and I'm learning about what I can do, some of those competencies that I have, some of the things that come to me a little more naturally, and marry that with some sort of a psychometric evaluation, because we had a conversation a little earlier where there was this listing of available jobs that even gave an idea of temperament. If you have this type of temperament, these are some of the things that you might want to be looking at. How do we do that?
Yes, I think one of the most dangerous things we can do is to mandate psychometric assessments. They are available for us to, you know, have a tab on where we are, but that's only to guide us. I think at no point should we be mandating, you know, Certainly the instruments are becoming much more sensitive, much more robust and so on. However, they can be very prescriptive. I will never forget when I was told by an instrument that I lacked team skills. Maybe that's what took me along the route of developing team behavior amongst others. But you know, it could stay with you and could prescribe your route. What you are today is not necessarily what you will be tomorrow. And nothing should be so prescriptive, or you take it on to that extent that you are, you know, you're mandated to go in a particular direction. No. I think that is where we could run into danger.
What are your thoughts on that? Because, and Dr. Siuna saying, because that mandatory psychometric testing and possibly prescriptive avenues that you're sending a child down, that sounds like the premise for so many dystopian futures, huh? So Dr. Siuna saying?
I couldn't agree more, because I think that kind of psychometric evaluation has its place. It can give you a general sense of, okay, what kinds of dispositions and interests you might have. Because the thing is that those instruments are typically, if I remember, those things are typically tested on very large populations. So they do have a fair amount of reliability, so that they can tell you, in terms of your disposition, your interests, your attitudes, your aptitudes, they can give you a general sense of what kinds of jobs might be available to you. But at the same time, I mean, we also know through psychological research that individuals, the thing is that individuals sometimes are so motivated, right, by wanting to do something, that they can overcome hurdles. They can surmount barriers that stand in your way. And I don't know, for example, that if you gave the people who founded Apple and Microsoft, I don't know that if you had given them a psychometric evaluation, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I don't know that it would have said to them that you are cut out to be an entrepreneur, right? Remember the founders. Bill Gates was a dropout of university, right? So what would the evaluation have said about him? So the thing is that these things have their uses, yes. At the same time, however, I think we need to give some credence to the power of people's will, their willpower, if you will, their own image of where it is they want to go, because young children even have a sense of, okay, they have dreams. And as Dr. Mongol said, people change over time, people's interests mature, people change their interests. If the psychometric instruments are digging deep into what an individual ought to do, which I don't think it is, then it seems, and that's almost like a bad horoscope, right? I don't know that your horoscope could predict, or your astrological chart could predict every detail about how you're going to map your life out. So what I think we need to avoid is mandating things like this, which basically box you into a little corner and determine where you will go for the rest of, 8-10 years, or in some cases the rest of your career. We need to be very careful about these and about the kinds of claims that the vendors of these instruments make, right? Because remember, people are selling these instruments, and they will make claims about the benefits, and we have to be very cautious about what they will do to learners and where they are going to place our learners on this path towards their own personal development.
And we continue looking at how we create that fertile ground or that fertile soil for learners to transition through the education system. We do that when we return. Stay with us.
World Book and Copyright Day is observed on April 23rd by the United Nations to highlight the magical powers of books. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, a magical 4-year-old was recognized by the Ministry of Education.
My name is Corinne Clark, and I am from Trinidad and Tobago.
Corinne presented a magical idea to her mother, Dion Clark, who was enchanted but didn't realize Corinne's power.
She came and she said to me that she wanted to write a book. Now, it's not that I didn't think she was capable of writing a book, but I really didn't pay much attention to her. And she kept saying it until eventually I guess she got fed up of asking me and not getting the responses that she wanted. And she just started to write, and she kept going on, and she just writing until the third or fourth day she showed me the book that she was writing in. And I called my husband. I was like, Ron, look at this, because she had the name of the book, she had the format just how it is in the book that's actually published. That's how she had it.
Little Corinne chose to share her world and her message with other children across the planet.
Okay, so this book is about all my talent and all the fun things I do with my family. To all the children everywhere, you are beautiful, you are smart, you are kind, you are good, you are brave, you are strong, you are brilliant and one of a kind. You are important. For all my friends. Hello, my name is Corinne Clark and I am 4 years old. I'm actually 5 now.
Even the Minister of Education, Dr. the Honorable Nian Gadsby Dolly, was mesmerized by Corinne's talent.
I can tell you that it takes parenting that allows for children to express themselves to result in something like this today. And this is one step, and she's going further, and who knows what she will end up being and doing. And it's a note for all of us parents that we have to allow our children to explore. And it's a note for us as well that COVID-19 and the emanating circumstances have been difficult. But there are also little nuggets of gold that we can pull out of the experience. Corinne's book is one such positive. And so, Corinne, on behalf of the ministry, we want to congratulate you. We want to encourage you to keep on pushing, because you don't know who you may inspire. You may inspire someone who has written a book of poems and has not published it yet to do so.
And so, Corinne's mummy made a proclamation to all mummies across the land.
Really listen to children, pay attention to their interests, because they show us from very early on who they are and who they could be.
The Chronicles of Corinne, 7 Days of Fun, a book written by 4-year-old author Corinne Anaya Clark, is available at bookstores across the nation.
This was a production of the Office of the Prime Minister, Communications.
Welcome back. We are into the construction phase. What do we need to do to create that enabling environment that allows individuals to transition successfully through the education system and even beyond? And we're doing so with Dr. Krishna Sunarayan, lecturer at the UWI St. Augustine campus, as well as Dr. Kamla Mungal, Director, Qualification and Recognition at the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago. So, not saying mandatory, we're taking that word out for a second, but fostering engagements so individuals have different experiences. So from an earlier point in life, it's not as though, okay, well, I'm out of school now, what do I do? You have experiences that say, oh, I'm interested with this. I see where the knowledge that I'm gaining right now has practical applications. What are some of those things that we need to build in terms of policies and systems?
Well, let's start from early on, because as you quite rightly said, it needs to start really early on. And I'm talking about primary, early childhood, primary level, where students need to start to apply. So the application of their learning, I mean, it's not just to contextualize the learning and say, okay, you're learning how to add and take away and subtract. Therefore, let's do this in a shopkeeper experience, but actually doing it, you know, feeling what it is like to hold money, to give money, to take money, you know, and to make sure you're doing it right. So the application of learning, which we call the authentic pedagogies, need to be employed inside of the school. That's step one. But certainly as we progress up the levels through the higher levels of the primary school into secondary school, students need to be applying this in communities, in real communities as far as possible. So we engineer those experiences. We should be collaborating with those stakeholders, the business community, civil society. We have a huge civil society, a booming civil society, but certainly not one that is sufficiently developed and it can benefit from the experiences of these children as well. So affording them those opportunities to interact with real life, you know, straight up to university. It's amazing. Even at university level, we forget that these things have to be applied in real life. So this culture of application, let me say it like that, a culture of application and doing and demonstration has to be built into the pedagogy, has to be built into the whole school system. I mean, I taught a course in analytics, in the analytics program at where I was before. And it was all about building a culture of digital analytics and digital transformation. And all my guest speakers were from Fortune 500 companies because I could bring them into the classroom very easily now with all of the technology. So putting students in touch with the real life, with the conversations of real life, the practice, the application in practice has to start from early. We don't have that culture within our education system as yet. Yes, it exists among the great teachers would do it, but it's not advocated, you know, policy-wide. It's not advocated sufficiently, I would say, and we can do a lot, much more to engineer that.
And I think that sort of engagement may also help to engender value in what it is people do, because according to a previous panelist, the output of the education sector is the input of the workforce.
That's right.
So I ask you that question as well, Dr. Siuna Singh, also thinking about the fact that may these early engagements help the child to have a better understanding of what are some of those subjects that they may want to do or need to do to get where they want to go. Dr. Siuna Singh?
Yes, so I hear me now?
Yes.
So I must say I endorse wholeheartedly what Dr. Mongal said, which is the focus on what we call authentic learning, because that is a significant issue for some learners where, you know, school can become very academic, it can be very cerebral, and you're learning a lot of abstract things which are in textbooks. We know that the abstract things that are in textbooks have a relationship to what is out in the real world, but unless it is, as Dr. Mongal is saying, unless it is that there is exposure to this real world through authentic experiences that the school system creates, then, which is, by the way, one of the reasons why you have things like field trips and virtual field trips and that sort of thing, then you are going to get a class of learners who, because of some of their physical realities, like, for example, their parents do not have access to transportation, parents are busy, parents can't give them rich experiences outside of their small communities, you are going to get children who are going to be in classrooms and they are going to be encountering concepts only in a textbook, and they cannot make the link, they can't make the application to real world. So therefore, after a while, they're going to get frustrated. They can't create this mental picture of what it is that is happening out there. So that's where, as Dr. Mongal was saying, that's the beauty and the essential nature of the practical experience. We need to build those experiences into the continuous learning that is happening in schools. And on top of that, what has to happen is that there's need for the monitoring and the assessment of that kind of learning. So it is that you are creating, if you will, a web of experiences for the children, which will show them where the information in the textbook comes from. You know, I'm sure you're all familiar with the ridiculous story of children who live in inner cities in the US, and you ask them where is the milk from, and they tell you it comes from the freezer in the it comes from the grocery in the deep freeze or something.
Dr. Siuna Singh, sorry, but that's not just in the city outside, you know. And even through the pandemic now, I've heard anecdotally, I mean, I wouldn't be able to say, okay, well, this amount of people, but I've heard stories like that as well. in terms of people not knowing, okay, well, a goat or a cow, these are the main sources of these kind of things. But in terms of creating those webs of experiences, you spoke a little earlier, Dr. Sunarayan, saying about consulting with the child and saying, okay, well, what resonates with them? But what opportunities exist for learner autonomy in transitioning through various levels of the education system? If the learner is not being asked those questions, but do they have avenues to take it upon themselves to do this?
I don't think that they do, you know. Was that a question for me or for Dr. Mangal?
No, I'll let Dr. Mangal take it. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, though.
So I think the education system has a great opportunity now in this time of talking about transition and so on to ensure that we create a system for learner autonomy to be paramount. And as I described the Ontario model, it is built on learner autonomy. So we can do it now. Even if we weren't doing it all along, we can do it very easily now as we talk about curriculum reform and bringing this entire process of developing your portfolios, asking yourself those questions: who am I, who I want to be, what do I want to learn? And at the next time when we engage, let's say we have a conversation about this 2-3 times for the year, you can say that, you know what, I took on this particular bit of learning so that I could get there. You know, because the knowledge is available on the, content is there on the internet, it's all around us.
But in the 3 minutes we have for this section, though, sometimes it feels as though the system that we have doesn't allow for that enough. So to have that kind of autonomous learning, it's almost as though you need to make this hard break from the system, which is why they're increasing, which may be why the increasing levels of homeschooling taking place or being observed. How do we bridge that gap?
I think, as you said, we need to take a hard stop, make a hard stop, and as we create new curricula, we design new learning experiences, we really have to do that flip from knowledge-focused learning to child-focused learning. You know, it has not been an easy transition. I said that right at the beginning for anybody. However, we have a huge opportunity to do it. And there are many models around us from which we can draw in order to get it done. So I think we have a huge opportunity right now at this point in time to really engineer that into our system and to respect and value our young people. Because that's what it's all about, respecting and valuing their choices and decisions, desires, needs, aspirations, and so on. We must do that.
And I want to talk about how we marry some of those things and the way forward. In addition to asking you for your closing statements, when we return from this break, we are speaking about transitioning through the education system. And we still have some time for questions, so we invite you to send your questions by the ways that you've been doing them. But we return with more after this.
Our world has changed, and with every day, our children's future takes on a different shape. How do we prepare them for a future that is uncertain? One where their education, in whatever form it takes, is their only passport for the future. This is the focus of the National Education Policy for the period 2022 to 2027. We all have a stake in our children's tomorrow, so we must all have a voice today. The Ministry of Education began this conversation with the nation in November 2020, when we said it takes a village. We listened to you, the members of the village, and drafted 8 areas of focus for education for the next 5 years. These are TVET revitalization, curriculum reform, digital transformation, Education Act, equity in quality education, transition of learners, enabling student success, and human resource development. We then continued the conversation in December 2021. We consulted with key stakeholders in the education ecosystem, including the Representative Union for Teachers, parent groups, school boards, and tertiary level institutions. Having received and incorporated their recommendations, the Ministry of Education is coming back to the national population for their views and opinions on the draft concept note for the National Policy on Education 2022 to 2027. This is your opportunity to join the conversation. Let your voice be heard. There are 4 ways for you to comment. Visit moe.gov.tt for the draft concept note. Then you can share your views on moe.gov.tt. Call in during the televised broadcast. WhatsApp your views to 776-0440 or comment on the ministry's social media pages during the live stream. Visit the Ministry of Education social media pages for further details. Education is a passport for the future, and share your views and help our children take flight.
Do you understand the realities of our education system as it stands today? Do you know what our focus should be to prepare our children to successfully contribute to our nation's development? This is the focus of the National Education Policy for the period 2022 to 2027. The Ministry of Education began this conversation with you in November 2020. We listened to what you told us, drafted some areas of focus, and now we have come back to you and all education stakeholders to get your views. In December 2021, we consulted with key stakeholder associations, agencies, NGOs, school boards, and tertiary level institutions to discuss the objectives and recommendations on the following 8 key areas of focus. 1. TVET revitalization. 2. Curriculum reform. 3. Digital transformation. 4. Amendment of the Education Act. 5. Equity in quality education. 6. Transition of learners. 7. Enabling student success. And 8. Human resource development. Having received their views, the Ministry of Education is now seeking national input on the draft concept note for the National Policy on Education for 2022 to 2027. Join the conversation. Don't miss your opportunity to let your voice be heard. Check out the draft policy document on moe.gov.tt and be a part of this conversation. Share your views on moe.gov.tt. Call in during the televised broadcast. WhatsApp your views to 776-0440 or comment on the ministry's social media pages. Education is a passport for life, and your views will inform an education policy to help our children take flight in tomorrow's world.
This was a production of Government Communications.
And we are back looking at how we foster developments to enable the transition of learners in the education system, that in a manner that helps them go through the system but also fosters their personal development. And we have about 2 minutes each for your final thoughts on the matter. Well, final for this evening. We start with you. Thanks, Dr. Mongo.
Thank you. DK, you know, COVID-19 had been a shock to the world, but has also provided a very unique opportunity for us to bring the education system much closer to real life. These kids are living in real life. These kids are living in their own world of technology and digitalization and so on. And we were forced to join them in that world, let me say it like that. And it would have promoted a lot of innovations by teachers. You know, teachers are doing some very unique, great things. But the technology also allows us the opportunity to share and crowdsource and so on. And so that the Ministry of Education can now engage that process of ensuring teachers develop these. They don't go backwards. We cannot go backwards, you know, back to face and life is good. That's not what it is. To go forward and to help learners transition, we must continue to live in their world, continue to engage in that space, and to professionalize ourselves in that space. Let me say it like that. And that requires engaging in communities of practice, engaging with others who are trying out the same things, understanding what people are trying out, sharing innovations, sharing practices. It is not the time for us to, I can do it better than you and therefore I keep it all to myself. Collaboration is considered to be one of the most critical competencies for the advancement of any professional or vocational space. And therefore, we must design that collaboration and design that sharing so that all schools, teachers, and students can be supported. It's about supporting them so that there's equity and fairness, and availability to all.
Thank you so much. 2 minutes from you, please, Dr. Sunarayan Singh.
Sure. So I think that going forward, as we have our discussions on how best to enable learners to transition through the education system, we need to have a very clear sense of what developmental needs our children have as they progress from early childhood through to university and into the world of work. What are those developmental needs that our children have at each stage? Then what enabling and facilitating mechanisms can be put in place to ensure that we meet those needs? It means that we have to bring into the conversation people whose jobs revolve around those things, like the psychologists, like social policy analysts. We need to bring those people into the conversation so that they can advise on the ways in which we can meet the needs of these learners. The thing is that when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of children, of learners in a system, it is very easy for individuals to become lost. And so that when we talk about transitioning from one stage to another stage of the system, we usually are talking about an entire cohort. So you're talking about 13 to 15,000 children at each level, going from one level to the next level. So where is the individual who has his or her own needs and desires and interests? It's very easy for that individual to get lost. And therefore, what we need to do is we need to put systems in place that will ensure that the ones who are most vulnerable do not fall through the cracks, because there are extremely grave consequences, both for the individual and the society, when those vulnerable children fall through the cracks. And the schools need greater resources, both human and material resources, if they are to make any kind of difference and ensure that there are not many cracks for the vulnerable to fall through. So I'm just making up a lot. I think schools need to be better resourced. They need to have better trained people. They need to have more physical resources so they can deal with the vulnerable population.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sunarayan Singh. Thank you very much, Dr. Mungal. And this has been the 7th installment of Education Passport to the Future, the National Consultation Education Policy. It follows equity and quality education, curriculum reform, TVET revitalization, the Education Act, human resource development, and digital transformation. Join us tomorrow when we discuss enabling student success. I'm DK Rossa. See you then.
Education is the passport to the future.